Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. Welcome back to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 45, Ping Post, the Scourge of Lead Gen. That is a pretty strong title, and we have some pretty strong opinions which we're going to share today. We always try and be transparent on this show, and when we first started, we said we wanted to lift the veil back. But I think naturally, because of the kind of guests around the show, we should put, great guests around the show, we've tended to focus on the good side of the industry. Today, we're going to be looking at the dark and shady side of it and sort of giving that balance to what we've done before. Simon, to get us started, could you explain what ping post is and the difference between that and ping trees, and just clear that up for us to get us going?
Sure. So ping post is someone that's collected a lead, could be the lead generator or a broker sat in the middle, and they can send snippets of information of that lead to a bunch of buyers. So they might send postcode or zip code and name, whatever it is they're going to send. They'll send it to, let's say, 10 different buyers. The 10 different buyers then make a bid. It's like an auction on that snippet of information to say how much they will buy that full lead for. And whoever bids the most, they get the lead. Right. So it's like a real-time auction, effectively. That's the best way of describing it. And the difference with a ping tree, so that's called ping post. The difference with a ping tree is there's no auction. It's just you might have 5 buyers. You're not going to send them any snippets of information, and you'll just have them ranked. And then, so let's say, I don't know, you were collecting a lead for mobile phones, and you had Vodafone, O2, 3, and someone else, like a mobile. You might try and deliver the lead to O2, and they'll say it's a current customer, we don't want it. It might then go to Vodafone, and it dedupes it from their prospect list or some other reason. So the difference is this auction-based bidding doesn't exist in a ping tree.
So I think the important aspect to kind of bring it back to here in relation to what we're going to talk about is the fact that the ping posts are kind of used in I say an ethical way, perhaps, and it's linked to kind of industries like payday loans and stuff like that. Is that right?
Yeah. So the way to think of a sort of ping post ping tree is like an evil comparison site, because it doesn't work in the favor of the person who is a lead. It works in the favor of the person selling the lead, because they get the most amount of money for it, and the person buying the lead, because they're typically able to well, they could have a better product, I suppose, but typically it's to do with like the amount of interest they can offer someone, or how much they're willing to, I don't know, deal with the risk of the person, whatever the reason is. So you'll find it a lot in payday loans exactly for that reason. But you also see it in insurance, other things, stuff like that.
Yeah. And just like, I mean, as you just it's like, that's a tech thing, or is that like, or is it the people who, like, is it the people who are demanding this and doing it, or is it the tech that's facilitating it? Like, what comes first?
Well, there's a demand because there's a lot of poor and vulnerable people out there, right? So I don't know, it's coming up to Christmas. What we're on November the 24th at the moment, so 2 days before this podcast will get released. And let's imagine, I don't know, you're a single mother, 2 kids, working 2 jobs, trying to get enough money. Costs of food, everything else is rising, and so you think, I need to get some money from somewhere. You've got bad credit. You're renting a flat. Well, I don't know. Basically, your possibilities of getting money are quite limited. And then you get a text out of the blue, or you search on the internet, it comes up on Google. Payday loan, pay back when you can, or over 6 months, whatever it is, borrow £500. And so you apply to get it, and you go through a call, whatever process there is, get delivered the money. and the problem with it, that's a demand, right? There is a demand there. But the problem with it is that person has now been delivered to the buyer of the leads, who isn't necessarily giving them the best option. They're already like down on their luck, right? I mean, that's why people take out payday loans. There's some issue. I mean, there could be wanting to buy something, but typically, there's some issue that they've got. So not only are they in trouble anyway, now you've put them in even further trouble and exploited the trouble they were in the first place. And what usually happens is it starts a cycle of debt that they could never really get out of. So let's imagine, before we started this call, I just had a quick look on a few payday loan companies and looked at some of the repayment options. Let's say you borrow £500 and you want to repay it over 6 months. So you pay the original 500 back, and it actually is double typically. So you're then paying £1,000 back to borrow that initial £500. Now, if you get a secured loan, I know you remortgage, you get cash some other way, and you were more affluent, you would never ever pay anything like that. And there's a reason, right? Because there's a risk associated with them. I get that. So you don't want to loan people money that are high risk, because there's a high chance of them defaulting. And the argument for the payday loan guys would be, well, that's why we have to put the APR or the interest rate so high. I mean, that potentially is a problem in itself, but the real problem is the exploitation of that person as a lead isn't being given the best option for them. They are literally being sold for the best options, derive the most amount of money out of them by the seller of the leads and the buyer of the leads. And that is where the problem is, because this should work like a comparison site. A lead should come in, and the bunch of buyers, the one that gets the lead should be the person that gives the consumer the best option, not rips them off the most.
I mean, I think I'm pretty naive to this world. Luckily, I've never, I'm fortunate never to have done this kind of thing. But from the outside, it just seems very exploitative industry. And the people who are doing this are, like you're saying, putting themselves before the need of the leads or the prospects. And they're just, I guess, like exploiting people. It's not like a fair, I don't want to generalize the whole industry, but it seems a very kind of shady kind of world to be involved in.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I didn't answer the question either that you posed before, which was the technology of the people. So we all know there's the demand, right? There are a lot of poor, vulnerable people out there, and they all want to borrow money and whatever else. So there's a huge demand that's sitting there waiting to be tapped. So the way that you carry out the ping post auction is, when someone fills a lead in, you need a mechanism to deliver a partial snippet of that information to, let's say, 10 buyers. But that's only one part of the story, because then the buyers need technology to send what their bid is back. And so, they'll work off whatever algorithms they have. I imagine it's looking at the economic demographics of the individual coming in, whether they've come in before, the age, I don't know what parameters and fields they look at, but it'll be a bunch of stuff, and then they'll make their option back. And then the seller of the leads then needs to be able to grab that information and sell it to the highest bidder. So it'll just be like a bunch of money or codes or whatever that come back. So the technology really facilitates this, because without it, you couldn't create the auction bidding. I don't know how you do it. You probably have to send the same lead to a bunch of people and wait longer for responses, or get a call from a single one. I don't know. But so the demand is fed by the technology, which is built to make sure that you derive as much money from this person's data as possible. And this is what's really, I think, the biggest thing about it is, right, and we talk about this a lot on this podcast, and it's a thought that's only growing stronger in society in general, which is to do with the control that you have over your own personal data, and the reality that your data is you, and it should have exactly the same rights as you do. And so when you go to a comparison site, and this has happened in the past before, I don't know if it happens now, I think there's some regulation against it. Imagine that the comparison site was ranked in the favor of the comparison site to derive as much money as it can. So when you went to search, I don't know, car insurance or home insurance, it didn't give you the best option. It just presented the option which made them the most amount of money. That's all that's happening. And this is someone's data, right? The poorest, most vulnerable people in their hour of need, when they need some money, they go for a payday loan, and you've just decided to screw them even further. And that is the problem with it. And the technology facilitates it. The demand is there. And then you have a bunch of people, of which there's hundreds and thousands of people that sit above it because it's hugely lucrative, right? But is it ethical? That's the problem. So I get calls. I literally had one, was it yesterday or the day before, from someone in Canada saying, do you do ping post auctions? I know we don't do it. And he said, why not? I was like, it's just, it's not, I've never known it be used for good. If you did it where you could send the lead and it went to the person that gave the person the best option, at Databall, we'd probably build it. But I've never known it be used in that way. So that's, anyone listening to this, that's an option I'd think of if I was going to do it.
Well, I was going to say, actually, I mean, we try not to talk about Databall on this as much as possible, but in part it comes from the fact that we do get leads. And I mean, not so much now we're not in the office, but I can remember we've been in the office and we've got leads coming in. That happened quite frequently. You have to explain the difference.
At least one or two a week we get asked, yeah.
So I think it is worth saying that we don't do, ping posts in that way and establishing that. But why is it still kind of, this is a naive question, but why is it still kind of allowed to happen in that sense? Surely there should be kind of some government or legal intervention that prevents people being exploited like this, or?
So I think there's two issues with it. So one is there are some legitimate cases where payday loans are needed, right? I'm sure. So imagine you are that woman and you can't buy a turkey for your kids, you can't buy them presents, Christmas is just going to be absolutely terrible, and so you can't borrow the money off anyone. You've exhausted every possible avenue of getting money. You might need a payday loan, and so you can't necessarily kill the industry, because as exploitative as it is there a need for it sometimes? So the regulation would then have to be around, I'd imagine it, like comparison sites are, but this is taken away from comparison sites because, what happens is they just see a form. So what, like a typical example that happens is you'll have someone buy a load of SMS numbers that come from co-sponsor a list of SMS numbers, or somehow they've got hold of it. They'll send you've probably done some sort of financial demographics on these people or figured out a type of site they've come from, whatever. And you send them all an SMS, and it just goes to a single form and it says, get money quick, now for Christmas, whether, the worst thing is when you're a marketer, you can sort of understand how you'd really easily play to people's emotions and need and stuff, right? That's the worst thing about it, because it'd be so simple. Don't let your kids go hungry this Christmas. The option is here. This is what we do. Bad credit considered, whatever else. That is so you've got that, and you've got this nagging thought in your mind about Christmas, whatever. Anyway, fill the form in, and then it goes to a bunch of buyers, and they're all going to be phone calls typically that you get. So then phone rings. After, in the background, your data is being used to just make the generator of that lead and the buyer of that lead the most amount of money as possible, leaving you with potentially the worst deal in your moment of need. This is the problem with it, right? I mean, it's one of those things where you're like, could you sleep at night doing that?
Well, it's kind of what I'm going to bring it back around to sort of to summarize or to ask you a kind of an end question. I said at the start, in this podcast, we do tend to naturally, almost accidentally, end up speaking about the good side and the good way of doing it all the time, because we've had great guests on. We talk about things we believe in, and that's great. But I think this is maybe even the first time, or explicitly, we've gone into the dark side of it and the bad side of it. And lead gen as an industry does get a bad name sometimes, and it is, I imagine, in part because of these kind of the shady practices. And we're not naive to think these don't go on. But the kind of final question I have is, do you think we're going to piss people off by talking about this and how big of an industry is it and who are we going to piss off?
Well, yeah, if I'm involved in payday loans and sat here listening to this, it's going to be piss me off, right? Because I'm like, oh, they don't understand. We're offering a service to these people in their hour of need. But you're not if you're not entirely transparent. And that comes to the point of where lead gen has a shady reputation and why some brands aren't attracted to it and stuff like that, right? Or like see the lead generators or certain people involved in it as a problem. It all comes down to the same thing, which is a lack of transparency. So you cannot tell me if you're generating a lead on a form and then selling that to the highest bidder that's going to generate you the most amount of money, there's transparency in that, because there isn't. You are just exploiting someone's data for your own benefit. Now, I get it in marketing, lead gen, nothing's free. You need to generate money. Obviously, everybody that's working and doing whatever needs to generate money. But there's a difference between generating revenue and exploiting people to earn more money. And so you could still make money by giving them the best option. It might make you £5 less per lead. So let's say it's the difference between like £45 and £50 that you'd sell a lead for.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. We'll see how people react to this. I think it's been interesting to kind of look at things in the other sense. People tend to, if they want to leave comments, get involved and argue with us on the wall, then by all means, they're very welcome to. But hopefully people listening found that interesting, and either you'll agree with us and think that kind of thing is a bit shady and not want to be involved in it, or you'll strongly disagree with us, in which case we're probably not the company for you anyway. So it kind of works both ways. That was episode 45, Ping Post, the Scourge of Lead Gen.
Cool.
Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.